One question I always get asked is, what's the best depth to use? And although pros may use 70, it might not be good for you. Now, there's actually a big difference between, the 95 depth kind of came in the patch. We know that some pros are still using it, but should you use it? Now, first of all, I want to talk about the best one, I would say, for someone who I don't know how they play. Balance depth. Now, people, they think that 31 depth and below, so for example, 31 depth and below, is a good thing. To be honest, you don't want to use deep. The problem is with deep is they sit too far back. I think a lot of people, for example, from Division 10 all the way up to Division 6, they use deep because they think, oh, this is a good way because deep must mean I can play defensive. But what this does is it creates more space for your opponent. What do I mean by that? So let's say, for example, this is the pitch and this is the box. If your back line sits deep, for example, like here, your opponent's strikers will be inside the box. Because the patch that came out in January, the gameplay refresh, is actually much easier for your opponent to score a goal if your defensive line sits deep. And once you get to the higher divisions, people can just start spamming Travellas and finesses from these angles. So using deep is actually not the way to go. If you wanted to be the most defensive, technically speaking, it will be 31. This is as deep as your line would go without sitting deep. Now, the balanced approach, I would say, is actually one of the best. The approach gives you a bit of a stable line. They don't push up, but they don't exactly do nothing. I think that's the thing. People, they look at this and they think, oh, the defensive line does nothing. Well, no. With deep, they kind of let you have the ball. They keep pushing back effectively. However, with balance, they still maintain. So there's like an attacker here. They may, for example, slightly push up. Or if that player makes that run, they might run with that player. So balance gives you the best overall of every single category. I would say that most people, let's say you have no idea, and let's say you struggle defensively, I would actually recommend balance. A lot of pro players also use balance. They mainly use this when you're in a winning state and they're trying to control the game and they don't want the game to press for them. That's the key thing. They don't want the game to press for them. Now, something I want to point out here is an example that I've gathered. Now, you can see with balance, don't forget, they still maintain that high line. A lot of people think is, okay, when my opponent has the ball or when I have the ball, that they think that their team is just going to sit back. Well, you can see how it works is when you have the ball, the defensive line, it always naturally goes up to the halfway line. You can't stop that. People think they can, but deep, you can't. So that's why there's no benefit of playing deep. And you can see when I give the ball away to my opponent, you can see, look, they run back in their position. That's their first instance to run back. And you can see, look, they hold their line and they kind of go with the flow. You see how they're not pushing up per se? They're basically maintaining their line. If you're the person that's susceptible to through balls and you always get caught in behind, using balance is a way to go because you basically AI, look, I'm not even controlling the defense here. AI is effectively occupying the correct space. See that? AI is basically holding a space. I'm not doing anything. That's AI that's making that movement. So that is why when I say balance depth, I think that's overall is the best one. If you wanted it to be the most defensive state, and this is what I say, let's say you want the more park to bossy kind of style, then you can go with 31. In fact, you've probably seen before that previously when the game came out, I was using 31 depth, and I do sometimes still use it from ultra defensive formations. If you want to be the highest line possible without going to high territory, you can consider something like 60. So anywhere between 31 and 60 is what's key. Now, I would say with one thing, with balance, you do lose the AI press. Now, this is where people get really confused, I would say, from Division 5 to Division 2. Because the game doesn't press with your defenders, people prefer to use high. Now, high only works if you know how to defend. Because, of course, when you're in the final third is fine because if you lose the ball here or you make a mistake, that's all fine and dandy. At least you got the back four responsible as a safety net and you got your CDM. So worst comes to worst, you lose the ball with the pressure. Worst case scenario, you don't have to worry because you got the defensive players back. The problem is with using high is that it applies pressure a lot more than you think. And I'll be honest, what happens is this line likes to push up. It doesn't go to like kind of offside, spamming offside territory. It doesn't have the auto offsides, but it does push up the line. Sometimes it goes to the auto offsides when there's a player available, but what you find is you get the best overall pressing balance. So this is why, technically speaking, An example of 70 depth, you might see it very prominent amongst pro players, but 70 depth, I would say, is the go-to to use. But you need to know how you defend. If you don't know how to defend, make sure you watch out some of my defending videos. If you're unsure, check out my Patreon series. We got a guaranteed series. I think it's like 10 videos long, defensive series. I guarantee that alone help you improve in your weekend league. But if you don't know how to defend, 70 could also destroy you. And this is why a lot of people that just copy tactics codes, don't watch videos, and understand how tactics works, they end up losing. They always say, oh, I'm going 7-5 because of this, or I started 3-0. Because once you're up against a player that's the same caliber of you, you need to know how to defend. Now, when it comes to 95, don't forget, they've now adjusted how 95 depth works with the patch that came out a month ago. Do you want to increase your win rate just before team of season? We got the Division 10 to Elite Division series. All the videos are finally uploaded. We show you how to get from Division 10 to the Elite Division basic gameplay. No speed boosting, no mechanic abusing, no Trivella at all, because we want you to get there just with basic gameplay to show you don't need to mechanic abuse. If you want a mechanic abuse, that's fine. But we want to show you how to play properly first and then show you what the pros do. What pros do is they used basic gameplay and then they mechanic abuse to get the top 10%. Not the other way around. They don't mechanic abuse first and then learn the basics. We go over complete in-depth tutorials. And don't forget, with my entire series, if you join now during team of the season, remember, if you don't get better after 1 month, we will refund your money. That is the nil guys guarantee. That is how sure we are. We've been running this for 4 or 5 years. We go over in-depth tutorials. We also go over pro gameplay analysis where we analyze the full professional player's game. We've got tutorials for everything, undefendable through balls, player locks, precision passing, precision shooting, everything that you could think of that goes beyond my YouTube channel. We've got the full defensive series, which defending series alone, just by watching that, I can guarantee you'll improve. Patreon.com/NilGuys. Links down below in the description. If you don't get better after 1 month, just send a message on Discord or send a message through Patreon and I'll refund your money. That's the Nil Guys guarantee. Don't believe me? Try it out. What have we got to lose? Less than the price of a KFC meal nowadays. I don't know what I'm talking about a month ago, and it literally just came out over a week and a half or 2 weeks ago. But you can see, look, significantly decreased amount of defensive pressure AI teammates can apply when using aggressive defensive approach. So this is the thing, because it's been nerfed, it isn't as effective as it once was, and that is why you might see a lot of people kind of going to the most extreme at 90 but not going to 91. There's 2 reasons why. Number one, top tier players can still use 91 depth and above and basically almost force a rage quit. You will see this a lot in the weekend leagues. I actually do this sometimes myself, admittedly I do it as well, but you can see this only with 91 depth. With 91 depth, the players go into auto offside territory. Now I'm going to show another example. Now don't forget, this is not in possession. Remember, this is not when we have possession of the ball or when we're doing something in particular. This is purely when your opponent has the ball, I would say in your half, because this is where people are misunderstanding it's in your half. As you can see, you adopt a high line that focuses on applying press once the opponent makes a mistake and setting off side traps. So when you're in this situation, for example, like here, have a look at my defensive line. So you can see when my opponent has the ball, they maintain that line, but watch, when the opponent goes near, they're trying to maintain that high line. They're not dropping off. They're staying close to the attackers and they're maintaining that distance. And you can see they run back, but they don't run back fully. They basically trying to maintain. So this is why I'm trying to show you this in squad battles, is that when you're defending, think about how you defend. Now, if you apply pressure and teammate contain like I do, and you like to be aggressive and you don't mind conceding a goal or so, if you want to have fun playing that way, then it is very, very effective. But you can see when the ball gets brought in here, you can see that high line is very effective. But equally, if my opponent was smart and diligent enough, they could easily do, for example, an L1 trigger and an L1 triangle in behind, or even a first-time precision pass. And this is why I would say first-time passes are extremely hard to defend with a high depth unless you manually select a defender. And this for those that are really going towards the rank 1s or rank 2s or rank 3s. If you're expecting that first-time through ball, you need to be able to run back. Remember I always told you 90 sprint speed and above? Well, you can see now everyone's turned to 90 sprint speed. That's why by evolutions, I was quite smart. I didn't go anyone 86 sprint speed. I made sure everyone was high, but you can see, look, they're staying close, but look, just have a look at how they're positioned. They're a bit standoffish. They're not going to go and be aggressive towards the opponent, but you see how they're positioned. So this is the most important thing. But one of the key things that people always forget about is that this has been changed after the patch. If we go back to the pitch notes, you can see here, they significantly decreased the defensive approach, so it's not as effective. But also, they've made team press. They've activated from 20 seconds to 45 seconds, so they've significantly increased how stamina is depleted when using team press. This is when you use your D-pad tactics. And to be particular, it's 2.6 faster stamina drain during excessive use of team press. Now, it's actually much faster than I initially thought. So that's why I'm saying it's probably better off going with 70. So if I was to use a defensive formation, or maybe one that's balanced, or to start the game out, I would probably lean towards balanced. If I'm versing a really good player and I'm expecting first time through balls, I may change my depth just to be careful. However, let's say, for example, I'm pub stumping. Let's say I'm playing the first 5-6 games in the weekend league. For my level, the first 5-6 games are very easy for me, unless I somehow manage to match a really good player on Friday or a top tier player. It's fairly easy for me, so I can cruise with a high depth, but you may not be able to do that. So it's important to make the adjustment. But I would say for anyone that's like rank 1, rank 2, rank 3, I would possibly start the game on 70 depth, and then if you need to, decrease it, because when you're at that level, you're probably going to know how to defend. You're going to know when to use teammate contain. And in fact, we've got a 3-hour video on my Patreon series from a few years ago, how to press. 3-hour video, completely in depth. So remember, if you don't know how to press, it can be risky. But what you can do is use a team press D-pad tactic, as mentioned over here, with the high defensive approach. So that way, you're basically like aggressive, but you're turning it on like a light switch. Don't forget the D-pad tactic can be activated on or off. So this will give you the good balance. So when you want to really press, you can use team press, and that way you can be ultra aggressive. Now, we all know, for example, how aggressive works in the final third when you're trying to attack your opponent. We all know that, but people always neglect the defensive side. They never always think about the attacking side, but they don't talk about how their defensive line reacts. So with a higher depth, that defensive line is going to sit higher. They're going to look to press up, and it's going to want you to be more reactive. Now, does this mean that the average player can change to 95 depth and play better? Well, yes, that's true. Because with 95 depth, an average player who doesn't know how to press, the AI does a lot for them. But it also depends on your formation. If you have a 4-2-1-3 where your CDM sit deep, it's not that hard, not that easy to kind of press, and it's not that hard for your opponent to break through. However, if you enter a formation like a 4-2-4 where you have center mids that sit higher as opposed to CDMs, they're much. So let's say your opponent's got a back four, for example, like here, and let's say you got your front four and your opponent's got 2 CDMs. If you have 2 CDMs in your team, your opponent has the exit strategies to use the CDMs, with your CDMs being quite far away. However, if your opponent has the back four, but you have center mids instead, your center mids are going to be closer to your opponent's center mids or CDMs and is able to press. So that is why formation also goes hand in hand with the depth. And that is why a lot of people are saying, well, I'm using 4-2-1-3, but it's just not the same. I'm using 4-2-1-3, or I'm using a formation with a CDM. I think the most notable one I always hear all the time is they use the 4-2-2-2, and they say, no, I'm using the 4-2-2-2. Or even a 4-4-2 holding, anything with CDMs. They're using these formations and feel like, oh, but I just can't press. A lot of the top tier players, remember, they may switch to this player, press initially the back line, but then they'll switch to their CDM and then move up to cut the passing lane into the midfield. The average player doesn't do that. So that is how the top tier players get away with using a formation with CDMs and still pressing in your half. Whereas, for example, the average player that basically relies on the tactic and use something like a 4-4-2, those center mids sitting higher, although from a defensive standpoint, they're going to be in trouble, because don't forget, when your opponent settles, unless you're defending outside your box, you have no CDMs there, just center mids. It's much harder to defend. But then also, with your center mids, they sit high and you're able to press the ball. So it depends. That is why an aggressive tactic is more reserved for, let's say, if you're trying to win the game or pub stump or play against a weaker opponent, or if you're losing and you need to apply pressure if your opponent is wasting time. The 70 depth would be the more aggregate balance of combining everything together, but being on the front foot, pressing, but not costing you too much as long as you know how to defend. But let's say you're unsure about how to press, you know you get taken by 3 wolves, and you know you can see a lot of goals. Now, I definitely recommend balanced. And as I would say, this is more for starting the game out, kind of sussing your opponent out, or maybe closing out the game. The depth on deep that's something that I would not recommend. I would not recommend that at all because you're sitting too far deep. This is the only one that I'll say is a no-go. The lowest I would say in theory would just be 31. So do not go below 31 depth. Just stay at 31. Do not go below. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget, if you want to get better FC, come to my Patreon series. We've got the defensive series. I guarantee you that alone during Team of the Season will improve your gameplay. If it doesn't, if you don't get better after 1 month, we'll refund your money. That is the nil guide. That is how sure I am that you will improve. If you just follow exactly what I say, you follow the course, and you follow the structure completely as I outlined it. And we also got a pressing video, a 3-hour documentary. You tell me which other YouTuber has that 3-hour documentary for how to press an advanced level pressing from a few years ago. Now, thanks for watching. Links down in the description. Take it easy. Catch you next time. Peace out.